Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. Read by the artificially created voice of Tilda Swinton for the Shakespeare Unleashed series for Audioverse. Part 1. Ancient Grudge, New Mutiny. The summer sun beats down upon the cobbled streets of Verona, a proud Italian city where two noble houses, the Montagues and the Capulets, have turned ancient streets into battlegrounds for their bitter feud. The cause of their hatred has long been forgotten, but its poison runs deep through generations, erupting in bloody brawls at the slightest provocation. On this particular morning, servants of both houses encounter each other in the marketplace. What begins with exchanged insults quickly escalates into violence as Samson and Gregory of the Capulet household trade sword thrusts with Abraham and Balthazar of the Montagues. The peace is shattered by the ring of steel on steel and the shouts of angry men. Benvolio, nephew to Lord Montague and friend to Romeo, tries to keep the peace. "Part, fools, put up your swords, you know not what you do." But his efforts are thwarted by the arrival of Tybalt, the fiery young nephew of Lady Capulet. Where Benvolio seeks peace, Tybalt lives for conflict. What drawn and talk of peace? I hate the word as I hate hell, all Montagues and thee. The brawl spreads like wildfire through the streets until Prince Aeschylus himself arrives with his guards. His patience with both houses has reached its end. If ever you disturb our streets again, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace. The prince's decree is clear. Death awaits any who reignite this ancient quarrel. As the crowd disperses, Lady Montague asks after her son Romeo, relieved to learn he was not part of the fray. Benvolio has seen him earlier, walking alone in a grove of sycamore trees west of the city, his manner suggesting some private melancholy. Lord Montague worries for his son, who has lately taken to shutting himself in his room, blocking out sunlight, and creating an artificial night. When Benvolio finds Romeo, he discovers the cause of his friend's depression, unrequited love for a young woman named Rosaline, who has sworn to live a life of chastity. Romeo speaks of his feelings in elaborate metaphors that suggest more love of love itself than true passion. Love is a smoke raised with the fume of sighs, being purged, a fire sparkling in lovers' eyes. Meanwhile, within the Capulet mansion, Count Paris, a young nobleman kinsman to the prince, discusses with Lord Capulet his desire to marry the not yet 14 Juliet, only child of the Capulet house. Capulet, though favouring the match, counsels patience. "Let 2 more summers wither in their pride, ere we may think her ripe to be a bride." Yet Capulet does invite Paris to a traditional feast being held that very night, suggesting he might begin wooing Juliet there. A servant, tasked with delivering party invitations but unable to read them, encounters Romeo and Benvolio in the street. Romeo helps read the guest list, discovering that Rosaline will be among the attendees. Benvolio seizes this opportunity to help his lovesick friend. "Compare her face with some that I shall show, and I will make thee think thy swan a crow." He convinces Romeo to crash the Capulet feast, masked and in disguise, to see that Rosaline's beauty is not as unique as he imagines. As evening approaches, Romeo feels a strange foreboding. "I fear too early, for my mind misgives some consequence yet hanging in the stars, shall bitterly begin his fearful date with this night's revels, and expire the term of a despised life closed in my breast by some vile forfeit of untimely death." Yet he proceeds to the feast, unaware that fate has indeed set its machinery in motion. Within hours he will forget Rosaline entirely, for at this feast he will meet Juliet, and their passion will ignite a fire that will consume them both, their families, and the peace of Verona itself. Part 2. Swift-struck love. The Capulet mansion blazes with light and music as masked guests arrive for the feast. Among them, Romeo, Benvolio, and their quick-witted friend Mercutio slip in unnoticed. Mercutio, seeing Romeo's melancholy persist, had earlier mocked his friend's lovesickness with a dazzling speech about Queen Mab, the fairy's midwife who brings dreams to sleeping minds. Now, beneath their masks, they move through the crowded hall where dancers whirl in their finery. Then Romeo sees her. Across the torch-lit room, Juliet moves with a grace that makes the other dancers seem to vanish. His practiced words about Rosalind's beauty crumble to dust as he speaks in wonder. Oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. It seems she hangs upon the cheek of night like a rich jewel in an Ethiop's ear. Juliet, just shy of 14, has never felt love's spark before this moment. When Romeo approaches her, their words form a perfect sonnet, shared between them as naturally as breath. He speaks of pilgrims and saints, she of palms and holy palmers' kisses, until their lips meet in a kiss that seals their fate. The moment is shattered by Tybalt's angry voice. The hot-blooded Capulet has recognized Romeo despite his mask and demands the right to challenge this intrusion with steel. Only Lord Capulet's direct order stays Tybalt's hand. He shall be endured. I would not for the wealth of all the town here in my house do him disparagement. As the feast ends and guests depart, both Romeo and Juliet separately discover the cruel jest fate has played. He learns from the nurse that she is a Capulet, while she finds that her first and only love is a Montague born to be her enemy. But love knows no such boundaries. Unable to leave without seeing her again, Romeo scales the orchard wall of the Capulet mansion. In one of literature's most famous scenes, he watches as Juliet appears on her balcony, voicing her private thoughts to the night air. O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Deny thy father and refuse thy name, or if thou wilt not, be but sworn my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet. Romeo reveals himself, and their exchange captures both the sweeping passion and delicate tenderness of young love. Their words soar with poetry, yet remain achingly real. They are both sophisticated lovers speaking eternal truths, and awkward teenagers discovering first love. When Juliet worries their love has sprung up too suddenly, Romeo offers to swear his devotion, but she stops him. Don't swear by the moon, the inconstant moon that monthly changes in her circled orb, lest that thy love prove likewise variable. The nurse's voice calls from within, creating a series of swift partings and returns that capture the reluctance of new lovers to separate. Before they finally part, they have agreed to marry. Juliet will send her nurse to Romeo the next day to learn the details of their wedding plans. If that thy bent of love be honourable, thy purpose marriage, send me word tomorrow. Romeo, his heart soaring, rushes to Friar Lawrence's cell as dawn breaks over Verona. The good friar, found among his herbs and medicines, is surprised by this early visit, and even more surprised by Romeo's transformation from lovesick over Rosalind to passionately in love with Juliet. Though he chides Romeo for his quick change of affection, he sees in this love a possible end to the feud between Montagues and Capulets. In one respect I'll thy assistant be, for this alliance may so happy prove to turn your household's rancour to pure love. The nurse, though garrulous, and trying Juliet's patience with her roundabout way of delivering news, brings word that Romeo will marry her that very day. Everything is arranged. Juliet is to go to confession at Friar Lawrence's cell, where Romeo awaits with the friar to perform the ceremony. In the friar's cell, Romeo and Juliet's hands are joined in secret marriage. Their joy is absolute, yet Friar Lawrence's words carry a note of caution. These violent delights have violent ends. Therefore love moderately. Long love doth so. Too swift arrives as tardy as too slow. Part 3. A plague on both your houses. The summer heat bears down on Verona's streets as Benvolio urges Mercutio to seek shelter indoors. The day is hot, the Capulets abroad, and if we meet we shall not scape a brawl. But Mercutio, ever ready with a jest and a sword, dismisses his friend's concerns with characteristic wit. Their peaceful afternoon shatters with the arrival of Tybalt, still burning with rage over Romeo's appearance at the Capulet feast. He seeks Romeo but finds instead his quick-witted friend Mercutio, who is more than happy to engage in both verbal sparring and swordplay. Their exchange of witty insults grows increasingly barbed until Tybalt's patience fails. Romeo arrives at this crucial moment, fresh from his secret marriage to Juliet and filled with love for all the world, even his new kinsman Tybalt, though Tybalt doesn't know their new connection. When Tybalt challenges him, Romeo refuses to fight, speaking words of peace that sound like cowardice to all who don't know his secret. I do protest, I never injured thee, but love thee better than thou canst devise. Mercutio, disgusted by what he sees as Romeo's submissive behaviour, takes up Tybalt's challenge himself. O calm, dishonourable, vile submission, alla stoccata carries it away. The swords come out, and what begins as something between play and combat quickly turns deadly serious. Romeo steps between them, trying to keep the peace, but his intervention proves fatal. Tybalt's sword finds Mercutio under Romeo's arm, dealing a mortal wound. Even dying, Mercutio cannot resist his wit. Ask for me tomorrow, and you shall find me a grave man. His final words, however, carry the weight of prophecy. A plague of both your houses. He dies, his brilliant wit and fierce loyalty forever silenced. Something breaks in Romeo at this moment. His attempt at peace has led to his best friend's death, and his newfound love for Juliet's family crumbles before his rage. Away to heaven, respective lenity, and fire-eyed fury be my conduct now. When Tybalt returns, glorying in Mercutio's death, Romeo's sword finds its mark. Tybalt falls, and with him dies any hope of reconciliation between the houses. Prince Aeschylus arrives to find two cooling bodies in his streets. His judgment on Romeo is both mercy and torment, banishment instead of death. But to Romeo, separated from his new bride, banishment is a punishment worse than death. There is no world without Verona walls, but purgatory, torture, hell itself. Hence banished is banished from the world, and world's exile is death. In her chamber, Juliet awaits the night and her new husband with passionate anticipation. Gallop apace, you fiery-footed steeds, towards Phoebus's lodging. But when her nurse arrives with news, joy turns to horror. The old woman's grief over Tybalt's death initially leads Juliet to believe Romeo is dead. Learning the truth, that Romeo lives but has killed her cousin, throws her into emotional turmoil. Yet love triumphs over family loyalty. After her initial shock, Juliet defends her husband. Shall I speak ill of him that is my husband? Ah, poor my lord, what tongue shall smooth thy name when I, thy 3 hours' wife, have mangled it? She sends the nurse to find Romeo and give him her ring, a token of her enduring love despite the day's bloody events. At Friar Lawrence's cell, Romeo receives news of his banishment with near-suicidal despair. He throws himself on the ground, raving against fate until the friar sharply rebukes him. Art thou a man? Thy form cries out thou art, thy tears are womanish. The friar's practical counsel and the nurse's arrival with Juliet's message finally rouse Romeo from his despair. The friar devises a plan. Romeo should go to Juliet, consummate the marriage, and then flee to Mantua until anger cools and the prince might be persuaded to pardon him. In time their marriage could be revealed, and the feud ended. It seems a reasonable plan, but fate has other intentions. Part 4. These Violent Delights. Dawn approaches as Romeo and Juliet stand at her chamber window, reluctant to part. Each silver streak in the sky brings them closer to separation, yet they pretend the light is darkness. Yon light is not daylight, I know it, Juliet insists, wanting to believe the nightingale sings rather than the morning lark. But reality cannot be denied. Romeo must flee to Mantua or face death. Their parting is filled with foreboding. Juliet, looking down at her husband, sees him as he will soon be. O God, I have an ill-divining soul. Methinks I see thee now thou art below as one dead in the bottom of a tomb. They part, not knowing it will be their last moment together alive. That same morning, unaware of his daughter's secret marriage, Lord Capulet agrees to give Paris what he seeks, Juliet's hand in marriage. When Lady Capulet brings this news to Juliet, she finds her daughter's grief over Tybalt has not softened her resistance to marrying Paris. Lord Capulet, enraged by this defiance, delivers an ultimatum: marry Paris on Thursday or be thrown into the streets. Desperate, Juliet turns to her nurse for counsel, but receives only practical advice. Romeo is banished. The marriage to Paris is a good match, and she should forget her first husband. Betrayed by her last ally, Juliet turns to Friar Lawrence. If in thy wisdom thou canst give no help, do thou but call my resolution wise, and with this knife I'll help it presently. The friar, moved by her determination, devises a desperate plan. He gives her a potion that will simulate death for 42 hours. Take thou this vial, being then in bed, and this distilling liquor drink thou off. Each part deprived of supple government shall stiff and stark and cold appear like death. She will be placed in the Capulet tomb, where Romeo, informed by letter of the plan, will come to rescue her when she wakes. Together they can flee to Mantua. Though frightened by visions of waking alone among the bones of her ancestors and Tybalt's fresh corpse, Juliet drinks the potion. But fate intervenes. Friar John, carrying the crucial letter to Romeo, is quarantined due to suspicion of plague. Romeo receives instead only the news of Juliet's apparent death from his servant Balthazar. Wild with grief, he buys poison from a poor apothecary. Let me have a dram of poison, such soon speeding gear as will disperse itself through all the veins that the life-weary taker may fall dead. The tragedy unfolds with terrible speed. Romeo returns to Verona, encountering Paris at Juliet's tomb. Their fight is brief and fatal. Paris falls, asking to be laid near Juliet's body. Inside the tomb, Romeo takes a last look at his seemingly dead wife, whose beauty death has not yet touched. Death that hath sucked the honey of thy breath, hath had no power yet upon thy beauty. He drinks the poison and dies by her side. Moments later, Friar Lawrence arrives to find Paris dead outside and Romeo dead within. Juliet wakes to find the friar frightened by approaching noise, and Romeo dead beside her. The friar flees, and Juliet, seeing the empty poison cup in Romeo's hand, understands all. She kisses his poisoned lips, hoping some poison might remain to kill her too. But when that proves too slow, she takes Romeo's dagger. O happy dagger, this is thy sheath. There rust, and let me die. The families arrive to find what their hatred has wrought, their children dead by love rather than live apart. Prince Aeschylus delivers the final judgment. Where be these enemies, Capulet, Montague? See, what a scourge is laid upon your hate, that heaven finds means to kill your joys with love. Over their children's bodies, Montague and Capulet find the reconciliation that eluded them in life. Montague vows to erect a golden statue of Juliet, not to be outdone by Capulet's promise of Romeo's memorial. The prince has the final word. A glooming peace this morning with it brings. The sun for sorrow will not show his head. Go hence to have more talk of these sad things. Some shall be pardoned and some punished. For never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo. And so ends this tale of star-crossed lovers, whose deaths were needed to end their family's ancient grudge. Their story echoes through the centuries as a testament to love's power to triumph over hate, even if that triumph comes at the terrible price of young lives lost. In Verona, they say the sun shone dimly for days afterward, as if nature itself mourned the lovers whose passionate hearts burned too briefly and too bright.